David had spent most of his life studying humans, but even he had never expected to have an alien visitor who wanted to learn about reproduction, not just in the biological sense, but in the emotional and social ways that made humans unique. Leora, as she called herself, was unlike any other alien he had ever met. Her skin shimmered faintly in soft colors, shifting like sunlight on water, and her eyes held a quiet intelligence that seemed to observe everything and yet reveal nothing. From the moment she arrived, she had been fascinated by humans. She asked questions that seemed simple on the surface, yet the answers were layered with meaning. "Why do humans choose partners?" she had asked one afternoon in his laboratory, tilting her head as if trying to see through his thoughts. "Why not just reproduce asexually like many species do?" David smiled. "It's not just biology for humans. It's connection, trust, emotion. All of that is part of why humans pair up." He had learned early in his career that explaining emotional concepts to a non-human mind required patience, analogies, and sometimes silence. Leora had spent the last few weeks observing humans from a safe distance, attending lectures in human biology, and reading countless papers. She asked about hormones, genetics, and reproduction cycles with a precision that sometimes made David forget she wasn't human. But she was not satisfied with textbook knowledge alone. She wanted understanding. Real understanding. One evening, after a long day of study, Leora leaned against the railing of his apartment balcony, looking at the city lights below. "I have read everything," she said softly. "I know the science. I understand chromosomes, gametes, fertilization. I know the words, but I do not understand the meaning. Why do humans find it important?" David joined her, leaning on the railing beside her. The breeze carried the smell of distant food stalls and wet asphalt. "It's complicated," he admitted. "It's about more than reproduction. It's about trust, commitment, care. When two humans choose to have a child together, they are not just creating life, they are creating a bond, a family, a shared responsibility." Leora tilted her head again, a gesture he had begun to recognize as her way of thinking deeply. "I have never experienced this. My species does not form such bonds. We produce young, yes, but there is no caring in the same sense. No closeness, no choice," David nodded. "That's why humans are unique. Our connection, our ability to care for another even before a child is born. It's not something every species has." He watched her processing the words, noting the way her eyes flickered with faint patterns of light, an indication that she was deeply analyzing. Over the following days, Leora became more direct in her curiosity. She asked questions about dating, relationships, and intimacy. She wanted to understand the rituals, the emotional communication, and the subtle gestures humans use to express affection. David realized that she wasn't simply curious about reproduction. She wanted to comprehend the emotional dimension that made humans so distinctive. One afternoon, while they sat in his study surrounded by models of human anatomy and stacks of books, Leora asked a question that made David pause. "Can a human show love through reproduction?" she asked quietly. "Is that the way you bond? Or is it only physical?" David chose his words carefully. "It can be physical, yes, but the act itself is part of a larger bond. The emotional connection, the trust, care, and respect is what makes it meaningful. Without that, it's just biology. With it, it becomes human." She considered this in silence. Then, with a hint of vulnerability he hadn't expected, she said, "I want to understand. I want to experience this human bond. Not just the act, but the feeling, the trust." David studied her for a long moment. "That's complicated," he said slowly. "It's not something you can just try. It's built over time through care and understanding. It's not safe to approach it lightly." Leora nodded. "I understand. But I want to try, with guidance." He could see her honesty, her desire not to violate boundaries but to learn deeply. He decided to approach this as a learning experience rather than a physical experiment. "Then we will learn step by step," he said. "We'll start with trust, understanding, and emotional connection. You cannot fully grasp human bonding without these." Over the next week, they began what David called the bonding exercises. They were not about reproduction directly, but about learning to communicate, to empathize, to understand human emotions intimately. They practiced sharing thoughts and feelings honestly, observing body language, and understanding subtle cues that humans often overlooked. Leora proved to be an astute student. She noticed patterns David hadn't even consciously realized about human interaction. She began to mirror emotions, learning to express affection and concern in ways that were natural to humans. She laughed when jokes were funny, frowned when she sensed sadness, and gradually, a quiet friendship blossomed between them. One rainy evening, after hours of discussing human emotions, Leora asked another question that made David's chest tighten slightly. When humans reproduce, they often speak to each other, touch each other, to reassure one another. Can this be taught? David thought for a moment. You can learn the gestures, yes. But the feeling itself cannot be taught. It has to grow naturally. Trust, empathy, and care, those are the seeds. The gestures are just the expression. Leora tilted her head, considering. I want to grow those seeds, she said simply. Even if I cannot fully feel them like humans do, I want to try. David smiled. He had never expected an alien to express such a desire for understanding, not just knowledge. Then we will try, he said. Step by step, as friends first. You must understand that without mutual trust, nothing else matters. In the following days, their interactions deepened. They explored human art, music, and literature, anything that conveyed emotion and intimacy. Leora was fascinated by the complexity of human feelings, the way humans could express love, fear, joy, and sorrow in ways that intertwined. She asked questions, sometimes blunt, sometimes hesitant, always eager to learn. One evening, as they walked along a quiet park path under the glowing street lamps, Leora stopped and looked at David. I am beginning to understand, she said softly. The bond humans form. It is not just biology. It is trust, care, patience, understanding, and love. David nodded. Exactly. And that is why humans are special. Our species survives not just because we are strong or smart, but because we can connect, care, and choose each other. She considered this, and then, with an almost shy clarity, asked the question that had been forming in her mind for days. Could we try it together? The bonding, I mean, not reproduction itself. I want to feel this connection humans experience when they choose each other. David felt a mix of surprise and admiration. He saw that her curiosity was genuine, respectful, and thoughtful. We can try, he said carefully. But remember, it is not about rushing. It is about understanding, learning, and growing trust. If at any point either of us feels uncomfortable, we stop. Leora's eyes glimmered with a quiet excitement. I understand, she said, and I will follow your guidance. From that moment, their journey changed. It was no longer a matter of observation and theory. It was a living experiment in understanding human emotion, in forming trust across species, and in exploring a connection that went beyond words or textbooks. They began to share more personal stories, small fears, and quiet hopes, building a foundation that David hoped would prepare her for the deeper lessons humans learned through intimacy and family. Even as the city lights flickered in the distance and the night grew cooler around them, David felt a quiet pride. Humanity had survived countless threats, wars, and challenges not only because of technology or strategy, but because humans could teach care, respect, and trust even to an alien visitor. And Leora, for all her otherworldly abilities and intelligence, was learning what it meant to be human in the most profound way possible, through curiosity, patience, and the desire to understand the heart, not just the mind. As they walked back to his apartment that night, the rain forming tiny puddles on the pavement, Leora looked up at him and said, I am ready to begin, David. I want to learn. Fully, David nodded. Then we start tomorrow. Step by step. We will learn together. And so the first part of their journey ended not with an experiment, but with a promise. A promise to learn, to understand, and to explore the emotional depth that made humans truly extraordinary. Leora was ready to step into the human world not as a visitor, but as a student of trust, care, and connection. The city slept around them, unaware of the quiet revolution of understanding taking place in one small apartment. And in that room, an alien who had never felt human emotion began to take her first steps toward understanding what it meant to truly bond. And perhaps, one day, to experience the miracle of human connection firsthand. The next morning, David prepared for their lessons with a quiet sense of anticipation. Leora had spent the night reviewing what she had learned about human emotions and connection, and she arrived at the lab with a look of quiet determination. She had absorbed so much in such a short time, yet she knew that understanding the depth of human bonding would take patience, reflection, and careful practice. David greeted her warmly. "Good morning. Are you ready to continue?" Leora nodded. "Yes. I want to learn, David. I want to feel what humans feel when they connect." They began with exercises designed to deepen trust and empathy. David guided Leora through scenarios that required understanding human emotions, such as comforting someone who was sad, sharing a personal worry, or expressing gratitude. Leora observed carefully, noting the subtleties in voice, gesture, and expression that humans often took for granted. She struggled at first. Her species expressed emotion differently, more visually through patterns and light rather than subtle gestures. But under David's patient guidance, she began to mirror human behaviors, and slowly, the exercises became more natural. She learned to smile in ways that conveyed warmth, to nod in ways that showed understanding, and to listen without judgment. One afternoon, they sat in the park near a small pond, the sun filtering through the trees in soft patterns. David asked her to describe a memory that made her feel something meaningful. Leora paused. Memories for her species were often factual, but she had begun to understand that humans experienced emotion in layers. She spoke slowly, describing her first encounter with humans on Earth and how she had felt a mixture of curiosity, awe, and hesitation. As she spoke, David noticed her voice soften in ways that mimicked human vulnerability. He responded with gentle questions, encouraging her to explore the feelings behind the memory. By the end of the session, Leora had begun to grasp the first lesson of human connection, that sharing one's inner world created trust. She looked at David with new clarity. "I think I understand. A little more. Humans do not just connect through actions. They connect through revealing themselves, trusting another to accept them as they are." David smiled. "Exactly. And that is the foundation for everything. Friendship, love, family. Without it, even the act of reproduction is just biology." Over the following weeks, their exercises became more complex. David introduced them to symbolic gestures of connection. Holding hands, small acts of care, and expressions of affection that were safe and appropriate. Leora practiced diligently, absorbing each lesson with fascination. She observed the way humans communicated unspoken understanding, how a simple touch could convey reassurance or comfort, and how shared laughter could create an invisible bond between people. One evening after a long session, they sat quietly on the balcony watching the stars. Leora's gaze lingered on the sky, then returned to David. "I think I understand why humans value connection so deeply," she said softly. "It is not just survival. It is trust. It is meaning. It is life shared," David nodded. "Yes, and that is why humans are extraordinary. We survive not just because of strength or intelligence, but because we can care for each other, even across differences." Leora studied him closely. "I have felt something I cannot fully explain. A warmth when I am with you, a understanding. Is this part of what humans feel?" David smiled gently. "It is. You are beginning to experience empathy and emotional connection. It is the first step toward understanding human bonds in their fullest sense." Encouraged by her progress, David proposed a new exercise, imagining a scenario in which they would create a human family, not physically but emotionally. He asked Leora to consider what it would mean to care for another life, to plan, nurture, and commit. Leora's analytical mind worked quickly, processing the concept in ways she could understand. She described how she would ensure safety, provide guidance, and offer affection. She explored the responsibilities and joys of human parenting, even as she noted that she could not experience reproduction biologically. David listened, impressed by her thoughtfulness and attention to emotional nuance. "You are understanding the essence," he said. "It is not about the act itself. It is about care, trust, and commitment. Humans build families not just with biology but with hearts and minds." Leora nodded slowly. "Then I want to experience this in my own way. Even if I cannot reproduce like humans, I want to feel the bond. I want to understand the depth of care humans share." David agreed, guiding her through exercises that simulated emotional closeness without physical intimacy. They shared daily routines, small acts of kindness, and even playful teasing. Leora learned how laughter could relieve tension, and how concern for another could strengthen a bond. She began to experience a sense of companionship that was profoundly human, and David recognized that she was truly learning the lesson he had hoped to teach. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet forest trail, Leora paused. "I have a question," she said. "If humans can experience such bonds, can those bonds be shared with another species? Could I truly connect as a human does, even though I am not human?" David considered carefully. "Connection is possible, but it requires understanding and respect. You have to honor human boundaries and emotions. You also need patience, empathy, and honesty. If you have those, then yes, you can share a meaningful bond." Leora's eyes glimmered. "Then I will try. I want to feel what humans feel. I want to understand fully." Over the next weeks, they continued their exercises. They simulated nurturing and care, explored emotional honesty, and practiced trust building. Leora grew more comfortable expressing feelings in human terms. She laughed more freely, listened more attentively, and even began to anticipate emotional cues without prompting. David noticed a subtle change. Leora's presence had become more human, not in appearance but in behavior, thought, and interaction. She had begun to experience a connection that transcended species, rooted in understanding, respect, and care. One evening, as the sun set in a fiery display across the horizon, Leora turned to David. "I feel something new. A sense of closeness, of shared understanding." "Is this human?" David smiled. "Yes, that is the bond humans share. You are feeling it because you have learned to trust, to care, and to share yourself." Leora paused, reflecting. "Then I have learned the most important lesson. It is not the act of reproduction. It is the connection that matters. The love, trust, and care. That is what humans value. That is what makes them strong." David nodded. "Exactly. And now you understand why humans survive challenges that other species cannot. Our strength is not just physical or intellectual, it is emotional. Our ability to connect, to care, and to trust each other makes us resilient." Leora's gaze softened. "Thank you, David. You have taught me more than I could have imagined. Not just about humans, but about life, connection, and trust. I feel enriched." David smiled. "And you have taught me too. Your curiosity, honesty, and dedication remind me why it is worth sharing our humanity with others, even with someone who is not human." As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Leora realized she had achieved what she came for. She understood humans not only intellectually but emotionally. She had learned that the deepest meaning of reproduction was not the act itself, but the bonds it created: love, care, trust, and commitment. She looked at David with quiet gratitude. "I may not be able to reproduce like humans, but I now understand the essence. I can share in this bond in my own way, and that is enough." David nodded. "Yes, and that is the most important lesson. Understanding, connection, and care. These are what make humans extraordinary. You have learned it well." In the weeks that followed, Leora continued her studies with renewed perspective. She observed humans, engaged in social interactions, and shared experiences with David, always focusing on emotional connection and understanding. She became a bridge between species, demonstrating that even an alien could grasp the depth of human bonds when approached with respect, curiosity, and patience. Eventually, it was time for Leora to return to her home world. She and David stood together one last time on the balcony of his apartment, the city lights stretching beneath them. "Will I ever truly be human?" she asked softly. David placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of warmth and reassurance. "You don't need to be human to understand humanity. You have learned the heart of it, and that is enough. You can carry this understanding with you, and it will shape how you see the universe." Leora smiled, a gentle, human-like expression of gratitude. "Thank you, David. You have taught me more than science ever could. I will never forget these lessons." As she departed, David watched her shuttle disappear into the night sky. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that humanity had made an impact beyond its own species. Leora had come seeking knowledge, but she had left with understanding, respect, and emotional connection, the very traits that made humans truly extraordinary. And in that quiet moment, David realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not just in intellect, technology, or survival skills. It was in the ability to teach, to share, and to form bonds that transcended even the vastness of space. Leora's journey had proven that humans could inspire understanding and connection, even in the hearts of beings from other worlds. The stars above twinkled silently, and David knew that this was only